The evening sun cast long shadows across what remained of Ironwood's once bustling main street. Weathered storefronts stood with broken windows, their doors hanging loose on rusted hinges. This frontier town, once the jewel of the territory, now lay in shambles, its glory days nothing but distant memories whispered by the few who remained. They called him Honest Josiah when he first ran for mayor. Josiah Vexley, with his polished boots and silver tongue, promised prosperity and growth. The townsfolk believed him, welcomed him, and trusted him with their future. That trust had been their undoing. "He took everything," muttered Old Man Jenkins, his calloused hands wrapped around a half-empty whiskey glass in Clara Finch's saloon, the last business in Ironwood still keeping its doors open. "The town's savings, the mining contracts, even sold off the water rights to that corporate outfit from back east. Then it vanished like morning mist." Clara wiped down the bar counter, her eyes hard as flint. Once the most sought-after woman in 3 counties, she now wore the weary look of someone who'd seen too much betrayal. "The law won't help us," she said, her voice steady despite the anger simmering beneath. "Sheriff Tate tried sending wires to the territorial marshal. No response. We're on our own out here." Around her, the remaining residents of Ironwood nodded grimly. The schoolteacher, Miss Abigail, whose salary hadn't been paid in months. The blacksmith, whose business dried up when Vexley redirected the cattle, drove away from town after taking bribes from rival settlements. The farmers whose lands were now worthless without water rights. "He's out there somewhere," Clara continued, "probably laughing at us while counting our money." As the lanterns were lit against the encroaching darkness, Clara pulled a weathered piece of paper from beneath the counter. With deliberate movements, she dipped a pen in ink and began to write. The notice was simple: justice for Ironwood. Reward for information leading to the capture of Mayor Josiah Vexley. All offers considered. "You really think anyone's going to risk their neck for what little we have left?" asked Jenkins, his voice heavy with doubt. Clara pinned the notice to the board near the saloon entrance. "Someone will come," she said, though she couldn't hide the uncertainty in her voice. As if summoned by her words, the saloon doors swung open. The conversations died instantly as 3 silhouettes filled the doorway, backlit by the dying sun. Dust-covered and road-weary, they nonetheless carried themselves with the unmistakable air of predators. The tallest one stepped forward, spurs jingling softly against the wooden floor. From beneath the brim of a weather-beaten hat, eyes as cold and unforgiving as a winter storm surveyed the room. Those who'd lived in these parts long enough felt a chill run down their spines as recognition dawned. These weren't ordinary drifters seeking shelter. These were legends from the frontier's bloodiest days. "We heard," said the tall one, voice like gravel underfoot, "that you have a snake problem in Ironwood. If you're already feeling your heart race at this town's desperate situation, wait until you see what these legendary hunters do next. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from and if you've ever witnessed justice being served in the most unexpected way." Clara Finch's knuckles whitened around the glass she was polishing as the 3 figures stepped fully into the dim light of the saloon. The locals shrank back instinctively, like prey animals sensing predators in their midst. "Cyrus Graves," she said, breaking the tense silence. "Never thought I'd see you and your companions in Ironwood again." Beside him stood a leaner man, dark-skinned with calculating eyes that never stopped scanning the room. Holt Shadow Mercer had earned his nickname from his uncanny ability to move unseen, to appear from nowhere with a gun drawn when least expected. The stories said he'd killed 17 men before his 25th birthday, each one deserving what came to them. The 3rd figure removed a dust-caked bandana, revealing a woman's face. Elena Vale's beauty remained striking despite the hard years, but it was her reputation that commanded respect. They said she could outshoot any man west of the Mississippi, and the twin revolvers holstered at her hips weren't for show. Mercer's laugh was dry as the desert outside. "Papers say a lot of things." The trio moved to a corner table, and Clara brought over a bottle of her best whiskey without being asked. The rest of the patrons kept their distance, conversations resuming in hushed tones. "What brings the most feared bounty hunters in the territory back from the dead?" Clara asked, sliding into a chair across from them. Cyrus poured 3 glasses before answering. "We're not back, not really, but we heard about Ironwood." "This town saved your life once," Clara reminded him, her voice dropping. "After that shootout with the Daughtry gang." "We pay our debts," Elena said simply, her accent still carrying traces of her Mexican heritage. "Tell us everything." Clara's tale poured out like the whiskey. How Vexley had seemed a godsend at first, bringing promises of railroad connections and Eastern investments. How he'd gradually seized control of every aspect of Ironwood's economy. The missing tax money, the forged documents, the mysterious deaths of those who asked too many questions. And finally, his disappearance 3 months ago, taking with him everything of value and leaving nothing but broken promises. "He's in the mountains," Clara finished, "surrounded by hired guns. The Crimson Spurs, they call themselves. Cutthroats and killers. Everyone." Mercer leaned back in his chair, skepticism etched on his face. "Sounds like this town made its own bed by electing a snake. Why should we risk our necks?" "Because," Cyrus said before Clara could answer, "we've got unfinished business with Josiah Vexley. Business from before he became mayor." Elena nodded, a dangerous glint in her eyes. Long overdue business. Dawn broke harsh and unforgiving over Ironwood. The bounty hunters were already mounted, provisions secured to their saddles. Clara stood on the saloon porch, arms crossed against the morning chill. "Start with Silas Dade," she said, "town accountant. He discovered discrepancies in the ledgers months before Vexley fled. Disappeared the next day. Some say he's hiding in the old Whitaker Ranch, 10 miles north." Cyrus nodded once, sharp and decisive. "If Vexley left a trail, we'll find it." The trio rode out as the town stirred to life behind them, their silhouettes merging with the vast landscape. They moved with the easy rhythm of those who've spent more time in the saddle than out of it, following barely visible paths known only to those intimate with this harsh country. "You really think this town's worth saving?" Mercer asked after they'd ridden in silence for miles. "Folks seem beaten, broken." Elena's eyes narrowed against the sun. "We're not here to save them, Shadow. We're here for Vexley." "And justice," Cyrus added quietly. Mercer snorted. "Justice is just vengeance wearing a fancy hat." The Whitaker Ranch appeared on the horizon as a collection of weathered buildings seemingly abandoned to the elements. But Cyrus's trained eye caught the thin wisp of smoke rising from the chimney, the freshly disturbed dirt around the water pump. "Someone's home," he murmured, drawing his rifle from its scabbard. "Elena, circle round back. Shadow, take the barn. I'll approach from the front." They moved with practiced precision, weapons ready but not yet drawn. These were people who understood that violence was a last resort, but when necessary, it should be swift and absolute. "Silas Dade," Cyrus called out, approaching the main house. "We're not here to harm you. Clara Finch sent us." The door creaked open, revealing a gaunt man, once plump and prosperous, now reduced to a shadow. His eyes darted nervously past Cyrus to the empty yard. "You shouldn't have come. They're watching, always watching." Inside, the ranch house had been converted into a makeshift office. Papers covered every surface, maps with locations marked in red, ledgers filled with numbers and names. Silas moved frantically among them, gathering specific sheets. "Vexley's operation isn't just theft," he explained, voice barely above a whisper. "It's an empire. He's been siphoning money for years, buying up land under false names. The crown jewel is Black Mesa." Cyrus studied a crude map Silas thrust at him. Black Mesa, a natural fortress deep in outlaw territory, marked with an X. What's he holding there? Everything. Gold from the mines, deeds to half the territory, and enough hired guns to start a small war. The Crimson Spurs aren't just protection, they're his army. The crack of a rifle shot exploded through the conversation. A window shattered, sending glass shards flying. Silas gasped, clutching his shoulder as blood blossomed across his shirt. "Get down!" Cyrus roared, dragging Silas behind an overturned table as more shots splintered the wood around them. Outside, Elena and Mercer were already returning fire, their practiced movements a deadly dance. 3 riders in red bandanas had positioned themselves on the ridge above the ranch, rifles glinting in the morning sun. "The Crimson Spurs!" Silas choked out. "They found me!" The firefight at Whitaker Ranch lasted less than 5 minutes, though for anyone caught in its fury, it might as well have been an eternity. Bullets tore through weathered wood and kicked up dust geysers as the bounty hunters returned fire with deadly precision. Mercer moved like his namesake, a shadow, impossible to track. One moment he was behind the barn, the next materializing behind a crimson spur, driving his knife between the man's shoulder blades with surgical accuracy. Elena fired both revolvers in a continuous barrage, her aim unerring even at this distance. 2 more attackers fell from their horses, their bodies crumpling like discarded marionettes. The last assailant tried to flee, spurring his horse desperately up the rocky slope. Cyrus stood from behind cover, raised his rifle, and exhaled slowly. The crack of the shot echoed across the valley, and the rider tumbled from his saddle, landing in a cloud of dust. "Is he dead?" Silas asked, clutching his bleeding shoulder, his face ashen. "Not yet," Cyrus replied, already striding toward the fallen outlaw. The man was young, barely 20, with a red bandana now soaked darker with blood from the wound in his leg. Terror filled his eyes as Cyrus knelt beside him. "Please," the young outlaw gasped. "I was just following orders." Cyrus's expression remained impassive. "Then follow these. Tell Vexley that Cyrus Graves, Holt Mercer, and Elena Vale are coming for him. Tell him Ironwood remembers what he's done. Tell him there's nowhere in this territory he can hide." "He'll kill me for failing," the outlaw whispered. "Then you'd better ride fast," Mercer said, appearing silently behind Cyrus. "Because if you're still here when I count to 10, I'll save him the trouble." They watched the wounded man scramble onto his horse and gallop away, leaving a trail of blood droplets on the dusty ground. Elena approached, reloading her revolvers with practiced efficiency. "We should have killed him," she said matter-of-factly. "He'll lead more back to us." "That's the idea," Cyrus replied. "Let Vexley know we're coming. Fear makes men careless." Back in Ironwood, word of the confrontation spread like wildfire. By sunset, the saloon was packed with townsfolk eager for details. Some spoke with newfound hope, others with skepticism. "3 guns against the Crimson Spurs?" Jenkins scoffed. "That's suicide, no matter who they are." "Then we'll need more guns," said the blacksmith, slamming his fist on the bar. "I ain't much for fighting, but I can shoot straight enough." Others murmured agreement, a spark of resistance kindling where before there had been only resignation. Clara watched from behind the bar, hope and worry battling across her features. Later that night, as she sorted through Old Town records looking for anything that might help the bounty hunters, Clara's fingers brushed against a false bottom in the filing cabinet. Hidden inside was a deed, sealed with wax and signed in Vexley's distinctive hand. Her eyes widened as she read the details. A gold mine, purchased 3 years ago under a company name she didn't recognize, funded with money withdrawn from the town's treasury. "The snake," she whispered, clutching the document. "He wasn't just stealing. He was building his own kingdom with our money." Outside, a rider approached in the darkness, the pounding hooves growing louder as they neared the edge of town. Not the bounty hunters returning, but someone else, someone in a hurry. And trailing behind, just visible in the moonlight, were more riders, their bandanas the color of freshly spilled blood. The warning came too late. Clara had barely reached the door of the saloon when the first Molotov cocktail crashed through the window of the general store across the street. Flames erupted instantly, painting the night in violent oranges and reds. Screams pierced the air as townsfolk stumbled from their beds, disoriented and terrified. The Crimson Spurs rode in like demons from hell itself, at least 15 strong, their faces obscured by their signature bandanas. They fired indiscriminately into windows, laughing as people scattered before them. One kicked open the doctor's door, dragging the old man into the street by his nightshirt. "This is what happens to towns that don't learn their lesson," bellowed their leader, a mountain of a man with a thick beard visible beneath his mask. "Mayor Vexley sends his regards." Clara grabbed the shotgun she kept beneath the bar and took aim from the doorway but hesitated. She was outnumbered, outgunned. It would be suicide. On the edge of town, 3 silhouettes appeared, alerted by the commotion during their return from the Whitaker ranch. Cyrus assessed the situation in seconds, his mind calculating angles, cover, threats. "Shadow, right flank, take the 3 by the bank. Elena, cover the civilians, get them to safety. I'll take the center. Clean shots only. We need to end this, fast." They moved like a well-oiled machine, 3 apex predators entering a slaughter. Mercer disappeared into the shadows between buildings, reappearing behind the outlaws with lethal efficiency. His knife flashed once, twice, 3 times, and raiders dropped silently from their horses. Elena's revolver sang a deadly duet as she advanced down the main street, every shot finding its mark. "Inside! Everyone inside!" she shouted to the terrified townsfolk, never breaking stride as she put a bullet between the eyes of a spur about to torch the schoolhouse. Cyrus walked calmly into the center of the street, rifle raised. "That's far enough," he called to the bearded leader, his voice carrying over the chaos. The leader turned, momentarily stunned by the carnage already inflicted on his men. Half his force was down in less than a minute. "Who the hell?" He never finished the question. Cyrus's rifle barked once, and the leader toppled from his saddle, dead before he hit the ground. The remaining Crimson Spurs, suddenly finding themselves on the receiving end of a slaughter, broke formation and fled, abandoning their wounded without a backward glance. Within moments, the street fell quiet except for the crackle of flames and moans of the injured. Clara emerged from the saloon, shotgun still clutched in white-knuckled hands. Around her, townsfolk appeared from hiding places, staring in awe at the 3 figures standing amid the bodies of their attackers. "You came back just in time," she breathed. "No," Cyrus said grimly, examining a dead spur. "We were too late. This was a message. Next time will be worse." The doctor, clothes singed but otherwise unharmed, looked around at the devastation. "What do we do now?" "We fight back," Mercer said, cleaning his blade on a fallen outlaw's shirt. His usual cynicism had hardened into something colder. "But first, you all need to learn how." By morning, as the fires were extinguished and the dead buried outside town, Ironwood's transformation had begun. The blacksmith's forge glowed red-hot as he fashioned crude ammunition. The general store became an armory, its shelves cleared of goods to make room for weapons. In the open area behind the saloon, Mercer stood before a line of townspeople, farmers, shopkeepers, barbers, and clerks, teaching them how to hold a rifle, how to aim, how to kill. "We're not just hunting Vexley anymore," Cyrus told Clara as they watched. "This is war." 3 days after the raid, Ironwood had transformed. Barricades now blocked the main entrances to town, manned by rotating shifts of armed citizens. Windows were boarded with firing slits cut into the planks. The blacksmith had forged makeshift caltrops to scatter along the approaches, designed to cripple horses and delay any future attack. At dawn, Cyrus, Mercer, and Elena gathered around a table in Clara's saloon, now serving as their headquarters. The deed to the gold mine lay in the center, surrounded by Silas Dade's papers and crude maps of the territory. "Black Mesa is here," Cyrus said, tapping a spot on the map. "Natural fortress, one main approach, steep cliffs on all sides. If Vexley's holed up there with the Crimson Spurs, a frontal assault would be suicide." Elena studied the terrain. There must be supply lines. No fortress can sustain itself without food, water, ammunition. "That's our way in," Mercer agreed. "Cut off the head of the snake by following its tail." Clara pushed through the saloon doors, accompanied by a haggard-looking Silas, his wounded shoulder carefully bandaged. "The Crimson Spurs have a camp here," Silas said, pointing to a location 15 miles east of Black Mesa. "Supply depot and gathering point. Their lieutenant, Jesse Crow, coordinates from there." Cyrus's eyes hardened at the name. "Jesse Crow. I know him. Former cavalry scout turned mercenary after the war. Dangerous man." "And our best source of information," Elena finished his thought. "We take him, we learn everything about Vexley's operation." The plan came together quickly. By noon, they were riding out, leaving Ironwood under the watch of the newly formed militia. Their path took them across the harsh landscape, following game trails and dry creek beds to avoid detection. As dusk settled over the territory, they reached a ridge overlooking the Crimson Spurs camp. A dozen tents clustered around a central fire, horses picketed nearby, men moving about with the casual confidence of those who believe themselves untouchable. Mercer studied the patrol patterns. "Guards change every 2 hours, sloppier at night. We wait until midnight, hit them when most are sleeping." They settled into wait, cleaning weapons and checking ammunition in practiced silence. As night deepened, Cyrus turned to his companions. "If this goes bad," he said quietly, "one of us has to make it back to warn Ironwood." Mercer nodded. "It won't go bad." The attack, when it came, was swift and brutal. Elena positioned herself on the ridge with her rifle, systematically eliminating the perimeter guards with shots so precisely timed they created the illusion of a single ongoing attack from multiple directions. Meanwhile, Cyrus and Mercer infiltrated the camp from opposite sides, moving silently between tents, dispatching sleeping men before they could raise the alarm. They converged on Crow's tent simultaneously. Inside, the lieutenant was already awake, pistol in hand, alerted by some sixth sense that had kept him alive through countless battles. "I know you're there," he called out, his voice steady. "Come on in and face me like men." "Hello, Jesse," Cyrus said softly. "Been a long time." Recognition dawned in Crow's eyes, followed by fear. "Graves, they said you were dead. I've got questions about Vexley and Black Mesa. You've got answers. How painful this gets is entirely up to you." By first light, they had everything. Guard rotations, secret paths, supply schedules, and most importantly, confirmation that Vexley himself was indeed at Black Mesa, protected by his remaining forces. They left Crow bound, but alive. A message for any Crimson Spurs who returned. As they rode toward Black Mesa, Cyrus felt a familiar tension building, the calm before the storm. "Remember," he told his companions as they disappeared into the landscape, "Vexley's mine." Black Mesa rose from the landscape like a slumbering giant, its sheer cliffs and jagged outcroppings creating a natural fortress that had sheltered outlaws and renegades for generations. The setting sun cast long shadows across its face, highlighting the narrow, winding path that served as its only conventional approach. Through his spyglass, Cyrus surveyed the defenses. Guard posts had been established at strategic points along the path, and the plateau at the top bustled with activity. At the center stood a sprawling hacienda, Vexley's seat of power, surrounded by smaller structures housing his men. "Crow wasn't exaggerating," Mercer muttered. "Must be 30 men up there, all armed to the teeth." Elena lowered her own glass. "And that approach is a death trap. Single file, exposed all the way up. They'd pick us off before we made it halfway." They retreated to a sheltered ravine to formulate their plan. Night would be their ally, but even darkness couldn't completely obscure 3 riders on that exposed trail. "We don't use the trail," Cyrus said finally, pointing to the eastern face of the mesa. "There's a series of ledges and handholds. Difficult climb, but possible. Gets us up behind their main defenses." "And once we're up?" Elena asked. Cyrus unfolded Crow's crude map of the mesa top. "We create a diversion here, He indicated the supply depot on the northwest corner. "Explosives from the mining cache. When their forces converge there, we move on the hacienda from the east." The plan was audacious, bordering on suicidal, but none suggested an alternative. They knew the stakes. Vexley wouldn't stop until Ironwood was wiped from the map, and they wouldn't get another chance at surprise. Under cover of darkness, they began their ascent. The climb was grueling, each handhold tested before weight was applied, loose rocks dislodged by their boots clattering dangerously into the void below. An hour stretched into 2, then 3, muscles burning, fingers bloodied from the sharp stone. When they finally crested the rim, they lay flat, catching their breath and surveying the compound. Guards patrolled in pairs, lanterns casting pools of light in the otherwise pitch-black night. Moving like ghosts, they slipped between shadows, avoiding the pools of lamplight. Mercer led the way, his uncanny ability to blend with darkness guiding them safely past patrols. They reached the supply depot undetected, where Cyrus quickly set charges while Elena and Mercer stood watch. 5 minutes, Cyrus whispered, once the fuses were set. Then all hell breaks loose. They retreated to positions surrounding the hacienda, weapons ready. When the explosions came, they were more devastating than anticipated. The supply depot must have contained ammunition because secondary explosions ripped through the night, sending Vexley's men scrambling in panic toward the flames. "Now," Cyrus signaled, and they converged on the hacienda. The first guards fell silently to Mercer's blade. Elena took position covering the main entrance, while Cyrus and Mercer breached through a side door. Inside, they methodically cleared room after room, encountering sporadic resistance that they dispatched with grim efficiency. Finally, they reached the master study, its ornate doors standing in stark contrast to the utilitarian nature of the rest of the compound. Cyrus kicked them open, rifle raised, expecting to find Vexley cowering behind his desk. Instead, they found an empty room, papers scattered across the floor as if hastily abandoned. On the desk sat a single envelope addressed simply, "For the fools who think they can catch me." "I'll write Chapter 8 with 500 words as per your original instructions." Cyrus tore open the envelope, his expression darkening as he scanned the contents. Outside, the chaos of the burning supply depot continued, but inside the hacienda, time seemed to freeze. "He knew we were coming," Cyrus said, his voice deadly calm as he passed the letter to his companions. "He left hours ago." Elena read aloud. "By the time you read this, I'll be well on my way to conclude unfinished business. Since you're so determined to protect Ironwood, perhaps you should have stayed there. I intend to leave nothing but ashes for you to return to. Consider this my final act as mayor, erasing my greatest mistake." Mercer slammed his fist on the desk. "He's heading back to Ironwood. With how many men?" A quick search of the remaining documents revealed the grim truth. Vexley had departed with his most loyal 15 Crimson Spurs, leaving the rest as sacrificial lambs to delay any pursuit. "We've got to warn them," Elena said, already moving toward the door. "No time for warnings," Cyrus replied grimly. "They left 6 hours ago. If they rode hard through the night, they'll reach Ironwood by dawn." They raced back through the hacienda, no longer concerned with stealth. Outside, the remaining Crimson Spurs were still battling the blaze, completely unaware that their employer had abandoned them. In the confusion, the bounty hunters managed to reach the trail undetected. "The horses are 2 miles back," Mercer calculated aloud as they descended the treacherous path at breakneck speed. "If we push them to their limits, we might make it in time," Cyrus finished, "but it'll be close." By the time they reached their mounts, every minute felt precious, every second potentially decisive in Ironwood's fate. They rode like demons possessed, pushing their horses to the very edge of endurance, taking dangerous shortcuts across ravines and rock fields that no sane rider would attempt. Dawn was breaking as they crested the final ridge before Ironwood, the first golden rays illuminating the town in the distance. Even from miles away, they could see the plumes of smoke beginning to rise. "We're too late," Elena said, her voice hollow. "Not yet," Cyrus spurred his exhausted mount forward. "Not while we still breathe." As they drew closer, they could hear gunfire, sporadic at first, then more concentrated. The town was fighting back. Clara's militia, Mercer realized. They're holding them off. The scene that greeted them as they thundered into town was one of desperate resistance. Barricades had been erected at strategic points, behind which townspeople fought with surprising coordination. But Vexley's forces were professionals, methodically advancing, burning buildings as they went. At the center of town, Clara herself stood atop an overturned wagon, shotgun blazing, directing the defense with fierce determination. Beside her, Silas Dade, arm still in a sling, was loading weapons and passing them to those nearby. Vexley was nowhere to be seen, but his impact was everywhere. The general store ablaze, the schoolhouse reduced to smoldering timbers, bodies of townspeople lying in the street alongside fallen crimson spurs. Cyrus locked eyes with Clara across the chaos, a silent communication passing between them. She nodded once, then pointed toward the courthouse at the far end of the street. The message was clear. Vexley was there, overseeing the destruction of Ironwood from what he must have considered a fitting vantage point. "One last time," Cyrus said to his companions, checking his ammunition. "Let's end this." The bounty hunters split up as they entered the battlefield Ironwood had become. Elena took to the rooftops, her rifle finding crimson spurs with deadly accuracy. Mercer slipped through shadows, appearing behind enemy lines to sow chaos with his knife. Cyrus advanced directly up the main street, unstoppable and drawing the bulk of enemy fire. "Fall back to the courthouse!" one of the spurs shouted as their attack dissolved into desperate retreat. Clara rallied the townspeople, sensing victory. "Push forward! Don't let them regroup!" The militia advanced cautiously but steadily, gaining ground with each passing minute. Near the center of town, Clara spotted Silas Dade carrying ammunition to fighters. Behind him, a wounded Crimson Spur raised his pistol at the accountant's back. "Silas, down!" Clara screamed, throwing herself into the bullet's path. The impact spun her around, blood blossoming across her shoulder as she collapsed. Elena's shot from 3 buildings away dropped the spur before he could fire again. Silas dragged Clara to safety. "Why?" he asked, trying to stem the bleeding. "Because Ironwood is worth fighting for," Clara answered, pale but determined. News of Clara's wounding ignited fresh fury in the townspeople. Even the hesitant joined the fight, armed with whatever they could find. The blacksmith led a charge with his sledgehammer, crushing through a barricade of crimson spurs. Cyrus heard about Clara as he approached the courthouse. Something shifted in him, his mission becoming personal in a way he hadn't anticipated. He slammed his shoulder against the barricaded doors until they splintered open. "Graves is coming!" a spur shouted in panic as Cyrus breached their defenses. On the upper floor, Mayor Vexley paced nervously, watching his forces crumble. He'd expected to find Ironwood defenseless, not transformed into a community of fighters. "Sir, we need to leave," his lieutenant urged. "There's a back exit." "Shut up," Vexley snapped. "I'm not leaving until that town burns." Below, gunfire intensified as Cyrus cleared the main floor. The lieutenant checked his pistol with trembling hands. "Sir," he said quietly, "I don't think we have a choice anymore." The courthouse had become a battlefield, gunsmoke hanging thick in the air. Cyrus moved through methodically, each shot finding its mark as he eliminated the remaining Crimson Spurs who fought with desperate ferocity. Outside, Mercer and Elena converged on the building, cutting down anyone attempting to escape. The 3 hunters worked in perfect synchronization, their years together making words unnecessary. In the judge's chambers, Vexley unraveled. His immaculate appearance had given way to panic as he watched his forces disintegrate through the windows. "This wasn't supposed to happen," he muttered. "They were just simple townsfolk." His lieutenant positioned himself to ambush Cyrus, but the experienced hunter anticipated the trap. One clean shot, and the lieutenant crumpled to the floor. Cyrus stepped into the doorway, smoke still curling from his revolver. "Look at you," he said quietly. the great Josiah Vexley, hiding behind hired guns and trembling like a child. Vexley raised his derringer with a shaking hand, but Cyrus disarmed him effortlessly. The mayor fell to his knees, begging, "Please, I can pay you. More money than you've ever seen." "It was never about money," Cyrus interrupted, dragging him to his feet. 5 years ago, you sold information that got our families killed. You thought we wouldn't come for you?" By the time they emerged from the courthouse, the fighting had ceased. The remaining Spurs surrendered, seeing their employer captured. Townspeople gathered in the blood-soaked street as Clara approached, bandaged but standing. "Mayor Josiah Vexley," Cyrus announced, "you stand accused of theft, corruption, and attempted murder. What do you say?" Finding no sympathy in the crowd, Vexley collapsed into pitiful confessions disguised as excuses. Mercer addressed the town. "This is your home. The decision should be yours." Clara straightened despite her wound. "We'll do this properly. A trial, then a hanging, at sunrise." As Vexley was led away, Cyrus watched with an expression caught between satisfaction and emptiness. The vengeance he had sought for 5 years offered none of the peace he had hoped for. "It's done," Elena said softly. "No," Cyrus replied, watching the sunrise begin to paint the eastern sky. "It's just the beginning." A month after the hanging of Josiah Vexley, Ironwood showed signs of rebirth. Scaffolding covered damaged buildings as hammers echoed through streets once filled with gunfire. The courthouse, gutted by flame during the final confrontation, was being rebuilt, this time with a community hall on the ground floor. In the saloon, now serving as the temporary town hall, Clara spread maps across the bar as she met with Cyrus, Mercer, and Elena. "The gold mine is legally town property now," she explained. "We'll use the proceeds to rebuild, maybe even get that railroad connection Vexley always promised, but never delivered." Silas Dade, now town treasurer, nodded in agreement. With proper management, Ironwood could become the trading hub of the territory within a year. Cyrus studied the plans with approval but remained distant, his thoughts elsewhere. The bounty hunters had stayed longer than expected, helping secure the town and hunt down the few Crimson Spurs who had escaped justice. "You've done well here," Cyrus said finally. "Ironwood won't need us much longer." Clara looked up sharply. "You're leaving?" "There are other towns," Elena explained gently. "Other people who need what we can do." "And other men like Vexley," Mercer added, his cynicism tempered, but not extinguished by their victory. Clara understood. These were not people who could stay in one place, who could build rather than hunt. Their skills were needed elsewhere, in the lawless spaces between civilized places. "You'll always have a home here," Clara told them, standing with the gathered town to bid them farewell. Cyrus nodded, the ghost of a smile touching his lips. "Remember what you fought for. Don't let anyone take it from you again." As they rode out, the sunset casting long shadows before them, Cyrus looked to his companions. "Where to?" "Heard rumors of trouble in Redemption Pass," Mercer suggested. "Sounds like they could use people like us." Elena nodded, checking her revolvers from habit. "People always need people like us." The three riders disappeared into the gathering dusk, leaving behind a town forever changed. Stronger for having been broken, wiser for having been fooled, and determined never again to mistake a silver tongue for a golden heart. If you found this tale of justice and redemption satisfying, let me know in the comments. And stay tuned for our next frontier story. It might be even more dramatic than the retribution that came to Ironwood.